Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Blue Cease. I'm the Executive Director of the Rochester Contemporary Art Center. Welcome to Augmented and In-Between Worlds, the last in our 4-session program on immersive media, supported by the New York State Council on the Arts and Wave Farm, and led by series organizer Rebekkah Palov, also promoted in partnership with 10 other small arts organizations throughout New York State, including our neighbors and friends at Visual Studies Workshop and Alfred University, the Institute for Electronic Art. We kicked off this series with a live event where we engaged with artists' projects and demos, and Rebekkah laid out the basic definitions, evolving language, and the, say, taxonomy of immersive media and technologies. Since then, we've had 2 other previous discussions about artificial intelligence and virtual reality. And today we'll wrap our series and learn about augmented reality and how 2 terrific artists, Will and Carla, are engaging with immersive tech in their work. I want to just note quickly, I'm super excited to hear from Carla. She was included in an exhibition that we had here in 2019 called Avatar Poetics. It was curated by Sean Capone. Welcome, Carla and Will. Before I hand off to Rebekkah for introductions, I want to just mention a couple quick reminders and thank yous, please. We're committed to making these talks as accessible as possible. And I want to recognize and thank Sean for his interpreting today. If you need sign language interpreting, please just say yes in the chat. And if we don't hear from anyone in the next few minutes in the chat, Sean will be able to just, relax and sit back and participate as an attendee. Throughout this program, if you have questions, please put those into the chat. And after the main dialogue between Rebekkah and Will and Carla, Rebekkah and I will moderate a few questions back to the artists at the end of tonight's program. Those of you who are new to ROCO, Rochester Contemporary Art Center, we're in downtown Rochester, New York, which of course is Haudenosaunee land, more specifically the Seneca Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We have, ROCO has a nice long history in the area, and I invite all of you to learn more about our current and future programs on our website, rochestercontemporary.org. All of the immersive media talks and programs are archived and documented on our site. And we'll also link to our website and to a terrific web resource that Rebekkah created for this project. Also want to recognize the members of our small team. Jess and Alyssa are on the call tonight, helping to administer this program. And also Katie and Frankie and Carrie helped in promoting and organizing this series. We did a lot of outreach to artists and arts administrators, especially arts councils across New York State, which was really one of the big goals of this NYSCA initiated program. Help introduce to art communities and independent artists and arts organizations these evolving technologies that are really here now, but we want to be sure that they're in the hands of working artists in all of our communities. And just want to briefly mention our current exhibition here at ROCO is a benefit for the people of Ukraine in partnership with Rock Maidan, and runs through September 17th. All of our exhibitions and programs at ROCO are supported by NYSCA, by the Farish Foundation, by Monroe County, and the Mary S. Mulligan Charitable Trust, in addition to about 1,000 other members who make a small donation and support our exhibitions. If you are not yet a member, I hope you'll please consider joining us and supporting all that we do. Lastly, I really want to effusively thank Rebekkah for her terrific work on this whole overall project. It's been a pleasure to work with you, Rebekkah, on this. Rebekkah's done a terrific job. I really want to say, as a researcher, as an organizer, and as a curator, this whole immersive Media project is a great service to all of New York State art communities, and especially the smaller cities and smaller communities that don't often become the focus of engaging with new technologies. And I think that's really the beauty of this. So I really, Rebekkah, I really want to thank you. Welcome. Please take the mic and take it away.
Oh, wow. Thanks again, Blue. Thanks, everyone. Hi. Thanks, the Roco team. You guys have been so great to work with. Amazing. But today is our final artist conversation in immersive media. Last week, we started with AI, artificial intelligence, which is a background problem-solving computational technology. In immersive media, AI, in concert with digital image sound technologies, both draw and play in real time, responding to viewer actions, generating an immersive world experience. We followed this with our conversation on VR, virtual reality. Virtuality is at one end of the virtuality continuum and places the viewer and their world knowledge within a fully digital modeled world. This evening, we discussed the other end of the virtuality continuum, AR, augmented reality. In AR, the extent of world knowledge is a combination of the world we live in and digitally modeled images and sounds, which then lock to and appear to integrate in our world. This combined information is presented most often as an overlay. Face filters are a common example of this locked or tracked overlay. AR does not require a dedicated device. It runs on smartphones, mobile devices, webcams, and smart glasses. It is different from VR, which requires a dedicated VR headset and tracking sensors. Because AR can run on devices we already have, it is an at-hand, accessible technology. Also, because AR piggybacks on smartphones, it makes use of the smartphone's multiple data gathering systems. These include onboard positioning, gyroscopes and accelerometers, GPS satellite positioning, along with AI technologies, including computer vision, speech recognition, localization, and mapping. This data gathering is critical to AR technologies and to some extent VR. Consequently, issues around data privacy are important to understand and consider. Then mixed reality is everything that fits in between or complicates the boundaries of AR and VR. Or mixed reality might be considered more of a coming moment when these springs of AR and VR merge together into a wider river with devices that will provide a seamless access to the entirety of the virtuality continuum. As both AR and MR combine and function in familiar modes, including the world we live in, digital cameras, mobile networks, commerce, combining these familiar modes with wonder and the human imaginary, it's important to have AR and MR artist projects. Projects that can foil market-driven narrowing of these technologies and give us breath to pause for needed, enriching creative and cultural experiences. I'm very excited, we're very excited to have our artists this evening, Carla Gannis and Pappenheimer, who have been both leaders and pioneers in arts thinking and artist creation in MR and AR. Great. So now I'll introduce everybody. Carla Gannis is a transmedia artist based in Brooklyn, New York. She produces works that consider the uncanny complications between grounded and virtual reality, nature and artifice, science and science fiction in contemporary culture. Fascinated by digital semiotics, Gannis takes a horror-vaki approach to artistic practice, culling inspiration from network communication, art and feminist histories, emerging technologies, and speculative design. Gannis's work has appeared in exhibitions, screenings, and internet projects across the globe. Recent projects include Portraits in Landscape, Midnight Moment, Times Square Arts, New York, and Sunrise Sunset, Whitney Museum of Art, Artport. A regular lecturer on digital art and extended reality, in March 2019, Gannis was speaker at the South by Southwest Interactive Festival on the panel, Human Presence and Humor Makes Us Better Storytellers. Publications that have featured Gannis's work include The Creators Project, Wired, Fastco, Hyperallergic, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, El País, and the LA Times, among others. In 2015, her speculative fiction was included in Devouring the Green, Fear of a Human Planet, a cyborg eco-poetry anthology published by Jaded Ibis Press. Gannis holds a BFA and MFA in painting from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and Boston University, respectively. Currently, she is industry professor at the NYU in the Integrated Design and Media Program, Department of Technology, Culture, and Society, Tandon School of Engineering. She is also a Year 7 alum of New Inc. in the XR Bodies in Space track, New York, New York. Also this evening, we have Will Pappenheimer, who is a Brooklyn-based artist working in new media, performance, and installation with an interest in spatial intervention and the altered experiences of the artwork as sight. His current work explores the collage of the virtual and physical worlds in the recent medium of augmented reality and mixed reality. He is a pioneer of AR medium and a founding member of the AR collective Manifest.AR, which formed in 2011. His projects and performances have been shown internationally at the Whitney Museum of Art, LACMA Los Angeles, SF MoMA and Bitforms in San Francisco, the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, FACT, Liverpool, UK, Contemporary Istanbul Art Fair, Istanbul, Fringe Exhibitions in Los Angeles, the ICA, Cyber Arts Gallery, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, DC, Xi'an Academy of Art Gallery in China, the New Museum, and the 2017 Moving Image Art Fair in New York. He recently debuted a solo show of new mixed reality sculptural works at the Alpha Gallery in Boston. The artist's work have been reviewed in the Whitney Museum curator Christine Paul's recent historical editions of digital art, a chapter of Gregory Ulmer's theoretical book, Electronic Monuments, Art in America, New York Times, Hyperallergic, Wired, Modern Painters, the Boston Globe, El País, Madrid, Liberation Paris, and Art US. A documentary of his work is part of Bloomberg TV's Art and Technology series. He teaches new media at Pace University in New York. Welcome, everyone. So now let's start our awesome conversation.
All right.
With beginnings. How was working in this media first seeded? What was that exposure? How did you take it from intrigue to making artworks? What is the story?
Well, do you want to go first?
Up to you. We'll just bounce it back and forth. I'll go if you want.
Yeah.
It's kind of easy for me to kind of mention this because there was a real starting point where I took this over, even though there's a kind of longer trajectory. In 2010, a couple of artists that were already using the very first forms of AR, which did not, I will talk about the developments since then, but Mark Skwarek and another artist from Amsterdam, Sander Wienhoff, created a project called We Are in MoMA. And I was going to show a few pictures of it, but I can, pretty much describe it to you initially. And what they did is invite a whole group of artists that knew a little bit about 3D to make objects for the MoMA Art Museum. And then they converted them into AR and created a multi-level exhibition that would be within MoMA without telling MoMA that we were all going to show up and look at these projects. So we all showed up the day of the exhibition. They told MoMA that we were doing this on the day of the exhibition, and we walked around and looked at each other's works and so on. So there were many artists that were in it, but that was really the starting point for me getting interested in this, because even though the cell phone is a sort of small object to look at things through, the power of being able to put something place something into a public space in a hallowed museum without asking permission was really interesting to me, as well as the kind of questions that it raised surrounding it, such as who controls what artwork is in the museum. What is that whole kind of power structure of a museum like that? So, and we eventually gathered together a group of artists from that exhibition and created manifest.ar. And we started doing interventionist projects with AR pretty much all over the world. So whenever an event would happen, like Occupy Wall Street, or even some of the big events that were happening in the revolutions in the Middle East, we would try and create virtual projects and put them there with GPS that kind of challenged the situation or brought some of the ideas into the forefront. And it was a wonderful group of people, and we moved very fast. We wrote a manifesto in 3 days. I was tasked with starting that off. And there was a lot of publicity, and Wired certainly followed us and was very good about publishing whatever we would do next and so on. So that was really my intrigue for doing it. We'll talk more about what AR is like, but I really saw it as another word I could throw out there is almost a post-conceptual kind of work, in the sense that the screen isn't huge and sometimes the technology isn't perfect at all, but it's the concept of being able to juxtapose something in a situation. So Carla, take it from there. I'm curious your beginnings.
Yeah. So I was assistant chairperson at Pratt Department of Digital Arts in 2011, 2012. And there were already some students, we were talking about this earlier, Will, that, around 2010, AR was not ubiquitous, or 2012, 2014, it wasn't ubiquitous like it is now. But because I was in a digital art department, I was teaching primarily technologies like Flash and building interactive kind of narratives and things. There were already students who were working in AR. And so we decided we needed to actually start, holding some classes. And so myself and the chair at the time hired 2 faculty, Meredith Drum and Mitch Miller, and they developed the AR app Augmented Mountain. And they came in to begin teaching AR courses in our department. And I work curricularly with students and faculty at both Pratt. And then we also, where I am now, NYU Integrated Design and Media, Mark Skwarek is actually, his office is right across the hall from mine. We worked on a collaborative project with them in 2014, where the students created this augmented bus ride. So we experienced these these AR kind of events along a journey, going back and forth on a bus from one school to the other. So it was really a very fun collaborative project. And so, through those experiences as an academic and in, running my department, I was really enthusiastic, but I hadn't found a place yet for it in my own work. I am generally I have 2 degrees in painting. So I wasn't an early adopter in my 20s, but I threw away all my paintings around 26 and decided, oh yeah, I'm ready, and which is around 1996. Oh yeah, I'm ready to embrace, being a person in my own time and using the mediums and the media of my time. But it wasn't until 2016 when I decided that I had a project that called for AR. And I was doing a project in my 40s, exploring self-identity and kind of collapsing the boundaries between self-portraiture and selfie culture. And so I was making a drawing a week for 52 weeks to publish as a book. I was also making these 4K videos that were outgrowths of them. And I thought that it would be really significant to apply an AR component. And I'd already published a book previously, 2 years previously, that was attached to this remix app. And so I'd worked with a poet and we published this book. And then there was this app component where people could re-author our text and images. So I was already really interested in ways to revivify a book, something that you read once and you put on a shelf and it's kind of done. Right. And we're at this age now, we spend more time looking at screens, but what about publishing books? I published like 6 different books throughout my career. I used to work in libraries, so I still love books, but I was like, how do you reinvigorate it or revivify it is my word, by adding these dynamic experiences. So I spent 52 more weeks. I published the book and then started selling it from my gallery, and then built a website and people could follow along. And every week I'd release a new AR experience so that people who were coming to that book, looking at these drawings and these kind of expressions of exploring the self in a hyper-mediated culture, then could see how they could expand in AR. It's like a 3D pop-up book, but like there was audio, there was animation, there were all of these other kind of extensions of self. It's also, in terms of being a post-conceptual medium, I'm thinking about the dematerialized art object of conceptual art in the 60s, also extension, somebody like Rebekkah Horn, an artist who early on was thinking about extensions of the body, extensions of self. And now we have this, virtual landscape or this digital stratosphere through which we can extend ourselves. And that was just really exciting to me.
Oh, that's amazing. So then, I'm sorry, just to clarify, you had the book already published and then you would take that as sort of a marker and release.
And so the images, it was
Okay.
marker based. And so I had people following on the website. And so for a year, at least, they took that book off the shelf every week.
Oh, wow.
And so they follow along, and I didn't do it in a linear fashion. So I wanted it to be nonlinear. So there were 52 drawings laid out from, when I first started the project through to the end of the year, but I would choose different ones. And I was also, in terms of this idea of kind of extending or expanding them into these multimodal kind of expressions, it was also a very turbulent time, if anybody remembers 2016. And so I would pick a drawing each week in this nonlinear way. So one week it would be page 56, the next week it would be the selfie drawing number 2 that I identified with in that moment. So some of the drawings that I'd done, a year previously, when I went back to them, they became, through the AR experience, more relative to maybe something that was happening, in the political sphere or like some kind of social context. So something that first started as maybe some kind of self-reflection, once I applied the AR and I'm doing it later on, there's another narrative that's added, not just through the technology, but through my position in time and place and space, and how I was feeling then, and how that kind of created the whole idea of kind of nonlinear, this idea of a new kind of trajectory and a new interpretation possibly as well.
Yeah, this extension of an extended reality.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to our next question under beginnings. Is there something in your practice that AR was an extension of? How does this earlier medium inform your approach to AR now? Has there been a dialogue back and forth cross medium, or did you just throw it all to the wind and went all digital? Well,
Yes.
Yes.
To most of your questions, I answer yes to start with. I will say just a quick kind of background to how I got into this medium. I went back to grad school in the mid 90s, and that was the kind of era of video installation and video. It was the dawn. It was a absolutely wonderful time to be working in video, and that's actually where I learned the computer was in nonlinear editing. So that was my first interest. And also I will combine that with the whole idea that during that time, there was a lot of postmodernist theory, and you couldn't go to art school without being really, really incorporated. And that was, for me, wonderful. Lots of people get bored and so on, or they critique it. For me, it was a wonderful opening onto things. And so one of the discussions that was really big was the concept of borderlines and crossovers and slippage in terms of everything from gender to different spaces and how they are delineated by literally borderlines of culture and so on. And so I immediately got into this idea of what the edge of something is probably the most interesting place to be, in the crossover and the confusion and slippage at that kind of borderline. So you can kind of see how that translates into AR at the borderline of the physical world and the culture, how culture affects the physical world around you, and then creating a counterpoint to that in the virtual world, and having those two bump up against each other and create, if you will, maybe a harmonics or a disharmonics, whichever way you want to go. I also got into, in the 1990s, I kind of took video installation into webcams, because webcams were kind of exploding. And so I would do performances on webcams or arrange performances in different parts of the world on webcams, and then record them and incorporate them into installation. And then eventually got from there into Second Life, which was, it seems like a big jump, but a friend of mine was already working with it, John Craig Freeman, and he invited me to just join him there. And as soon as I went in and had some interactions there, I was kind of hooked on it. So that was really my entry into 3D and using 3D, and really the stepping stone. And literally we took some of the things of our project and we put them in AR. I will just screen share for 1 second here and show you a project that we did, which was sort of multi-dimensional, called vertiflenurizine. And it was basically to create a drug company for the internet. Let me see if I can do this properly here. Share. Can we see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so this was actually a proposition to Rhizome at the time. And what we did is we created both physical clinics as well as virtual clinics. And we basically created a technological drug that you could take both through your own computer and in Second Life. And what it would do is it would automatically send you on a teleported trip, which also caused you to kind of hallucinate from different images as you would go on this trip. And basically what we did, and this is sort of some of the things that you could see when you were in Second Life, as well as some of the experience you would see in person. And then we actually, in exhibitions, we did one in Los Angeles and one in China, believe it or not. We created an actual clinic where you would come in and wait your turn. And then when you went into the doctor's office and I played the doctor with a paint on stethoscope, we would basically plug the drug in and you would watch your avatar go on this kind of trip. And I would ask you a series of questions in the process of it. And as you can see in the upper right here, it actually got a huge amount of publicity, and a lot of people objected to us selling drugs in a virtual world, as well as creating a clinic without permission for doing a clinic. Why am I, sort of going through these details is just that it was a way of sort of bridging the idea from the virtual world to the real world, so that when I saw how AR could act, I immediately saw the kind of potential for it. So I'll stop there on that one.
So I might share an image before as a preface to what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Will. And by the way, I just wanted to mention, when I first embarked on incorporating AR in my work and began teaching AR classes, so this is around 2016, Will was the first person I brought as a visitor to my class, and definitely manifest.ar. I was always teaching in class, and of course that Second Life work too. So I'm going to share now. So we're going the Wayback Machine. So in terms of, the extensions, that seems to be the word of the night. In 1998, I first developed this avatar because I was kind of having a schism. I was new to the city. I'm originally from a rural area, not from a metropolis. I went to Boston University for grad school. So Boston was kind of a buffer, but still New York kind of kicked me in the butt a little bit. So I created Sister Gemini, and to the left in this slide, this is an early expression of Sister Gemini. She was my avatar. She also was an AI. I have a whole backstory, and actually in 1998, it was a lot of writing that I did and drawing. And then what you see here are stills from one of her video performances in 2001. She's also starred in an online interactive work produced with an application, if anybody remembers it, called Flash. And so I worked so much in Flash back then. And then there's another project you see top right, Transmit 1.0 from 2002. And this is where I interviewed various friends of mine in creative fields. I lived in an illegal loft in Williamsburg at the time, and there were musicians and dancers and choreographers and artists, and I was like, wow, we have so many stories to share. And so I interviewed them as themselves, but then I created these avatars that represented different media stereotypes. And so it became kind of this collapse of their identity, one's authentic identity, and then how or what happens when it gets mediated through an avatar. And I was really wanting to create holograms, but I didn't have the means or the funds to produce them at the time. So I just got this idea. So I laser cut a sheet of plexi, of smoked plexi or frosted plexi, and rear projected through it. And then, by using all these different video effects, because like Will, I didn't go to school for it. I made oil paintings in school, but I taught myself video through, getting internships and, reading manuals. We used to read manuals back then. Remember, Will? Yeah. And so, yeah, Transmit 1.0 was from 2002, and there were 10, obviously 1, 0, 10 different participants in the project. And I showed that at various locations, and it was always a fun project because one other thing, I'm just showing stills here, but I manipulated the audio in such a way that certain parts were hard to hear. It was almost like it was in outer space. And so there was this attempt to communicate, but still a failure to communicate, which was kind of where we were with our technologies at that point. I had so many dreams for what I could make in Flash, for example, and I was working in web design during the day. That's why I created Sister Gemini too, because during the day I was doing corporate work, and at night she's what kept my art alive. She hacked into websites through QuickTime videos, metaphorically, not really, and because half my family's from the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, when I was growing up, it was, I have traveled from time and, you know, through time and space in terms of Appalachian Mountains to here. So I made an electronic dulcimer for her to play because my grandfather made dulcimers and banjos and fiddles. So I had to kind of find a way through Sister Gemini to reconcile my early identity growing up in the South, my identity as a web designer who wants to be an artist, a former painter who's now gone digital. And so it all kind of converged in Sister Gemini. So then the bottom image you see on the right, this is from 2010, where I staged a race between myself and my Second Life avatar, Jezebel Langley. And I run down the middle of a highway in physical reality. And she begins in Second Life in the middle of a highway. Some context. I had just run the New York Marathon and I was feeling pretty legit. You know, I trained for 8 months. I finished it in 4 hours. I felt kind of like a really well-conditioned human. I haven't been since. I'd spent way too much time on a computer. But I went down south to visit my parents. They live in a town of 3,000. So when you see that highway, I wasn't risking that much because it's a little tiny town. And I'm down there and I'm on Second Life because there's not a lot to do. And I start realizing I'm jealous of my avatar, Jezebel, because she can fly, she can teleport, and she could run like 10 marathons in a day, you know, and I'm still kind of recovering from mine. And so my dad actually works in video. And so I was like, Dad, let's get the truck out. So he got his video camera. My mom drove the truck and they followed me as I ran down that highway. But there was something else I was thinking about in this piece, beyond just being jealous of my avatar, was she ultimately converges in my ontological space. So we're running the race together. Of course, this is done through, video effects at the time. I'd like to stage a live one now. But the other thing that I was thinking about were risks, because I have explored identity, as you can see, for several decades now, and the elasticity of identity and what it means in terms of these extensions into these new and emerging realities. And I never use the term IRL because it's all real life, or I see it as that way. But there are different consequences. So when I run down the middle of a highway and when my avatar runs down the middle of a highway, she can respawn. I cannot. So as you see, there's a lot of performative work in these early pieces that I'm sharing. And I feel like that kind of dovetails into, working with augmented reality, this place where you have, or this technology that allows you to both exist in the now in the framework of base reality, but to have these overlays that provide new interpretations or new experiences of identity. A couple more things, because I know we want to go on to other questions, so I'll keep this quick. I just want to say, because one other part of your question was the dialogue back and forth. I'm getting to it. I kind of went off script there a little bit. Most of my major projects are multimodal. So for example, in the case of Sister Gemini, there were pen and ink drawings. There was an actual story that I wrote, an interactive web narrative, animated videos, digital print works, and installation. I redrew the Office cubicle that she first kind of emerged in. I was sitting in a cubicle when I first started writing her, and I redrew that as an installation. And I hand drew the entire thing, trompe l'oeil. I spent 10 days doing it. And then I put my virtual, flash interactive narrative on a computer on a desk. At the end, the drawing got destroyed, but guess what stayed? The flash narrative. Unfortunately, flash isn't around now, but it was a point I was making back then. But that thing about multimodal. So she also was represented in comic books. So I really like the idea of starting with a core concept. And we can do this today because we have so many channels, a core concept, narrative, or idea, and then instantiating it across these platforms. Another piece I did, and I'm wrapping this up, the Garden of Earthly Delights. I made the Garden of Emoji Delights. I emojified it, and it's been instantiated as a moving image work, a 3D printed sculpture, or several large-scale digital print work, and as an AR project. And I wanted to get to this because Will was talking about this, because you're a pioneer in hacking the museum. My hack the museum moment, my first one anyway, was when I went to the Prado. I'd never seen the piece itself. I'd spent a year and a half of my life remixing Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And I finally get to the Prado to see it, but I'd also used the original painting as the image triggers. And so they don't allow photography. And oh my gosh, this is being recorded. I hope the Prado doesn't come after me. But I surreptitiously whip out my iPhone, and it was just such a penultimate moment to have my version of Bosch overlaying the original painting. So I think I'm going to stop there and I'll stop sharing.
Carla, just a quick response, a couple of things there that you're pointing to that are really wonderful. One is that when we talk about AR, right, and projects in AR, there are these moments where the physical world bumps up against the virtual world, and it doesn't always, you know, compute that well. Like the idea of an ideal you know, virtual project and a physical one. And that's certainly true with identity. It's very easy to sort of take on different identities within virtual media, but it's another thing when you're working in the real world. And there's even been, you know, Pokemon had a lot of problems with it where, you know, audience would be directed to go to some physical space that was private property or rental property.
Or they get hit by a car.
Or they get hit by a car. So yeah, so there's very interesting things in AR about, you know, when you talk about mixtures of the real world. The other thing I just want to mention and augment, no pun intended, to what you're saying, is that one of the wonderful things about working with AR was this idea, you could say it's almost like graffiti, putting things where you're not supposed to put them. I'm going to call it a David and Goliath effect, in the sense that you can put something in a place that's completely forbidden and so on. And then the challenge always was to go photograph it or videotape it in that location. And that's what you were doing in the Prado. And that's a very special kind of provocation about the work and its, you know, its origins.
Terrific. Yeah, I love the slippage. I love it when things don't line up, quite honestly. I really love like failures and the sort of, I don't know, having to fill in that gap as a viewer in much, you know, to performance of ourselves though too is, I don't know, a sloppy, slippy soup that Carla's working on. Okay, any thoughts, recommendations, how one might start out? Any communities or resources? I know it's a different era now. Like if one were an artist now, if one went to painting school and now was looking to engage these, any quick recommendations?
I am going to put in the chat a whole list of connections. Okay.
Well,
and
you've been so prepared. I feel like
I know. Well, I had the time. And actually, Carla, I had to prepare for another talk, so this was kind of ready to go.
There are no grades. It's good.
Yeah.
in my office.
So, and this is also what I do for teaching it too. So I can keep my answer rather short and let the references speak for themselves. What I'm going to do when I do this is, and I'll just say generally, there are a lot of AR platforms that really want you to get involved in them. So the invitation is really out there, and you are very good at Rebekkah, in mentioning that you can do this on your phone. You can actually create all the work on your phone, although it's nice to have a computer. It's nice to get, you know, sophisticated with it. So I'm going to organize it I've organized it in terms of entry level, mid level, and then advanced. And so I'll give those connections, because I don't want to hit you with connections like to Unity, which you really have to work with for a whole year. Whereas, something like Hoverlay, which is something I'm using now, you can be doing AR in maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, or you can be doing it very quickly. So I'll put that in. If you want me to put in now while Carla answers, then it'll be there in the chat.
That's really so generous. Thank you.
I think that is a great resource. And I think that kind of answers the question. I just had a kind of list here, but I think having links terrific job. I think that will cover, the one, other kind of anecdote I was going to share here. I'm a big fan of speculative fiction and speculative design. And so there are all these applications, and it's so ubiquitous today. There's, Flipbar, there are all the different filters, Snapchat, Instagram, and these different pipelines through Unity and Euphoria. And all of that is very exciting. And, as Will was saying, you can get started within a couple of hours. But I also always want to recommend that people are inspired by other things that lead them to AR. And even the idea that AR, this idea of augmenting ourselves, extending ourselves, we're tool makers. We've been, creating technologies from nearly the beginning, at least what's documented in recorded human history. And so interestingly, I just wanted to share this anecdote that L. Frank Baum, anybody know him? He wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, but he also wrote his children's book in 1901, The Master Key, an electrical fairy tale, founded upon the mysteries of electricity and the optimism of its devotees. 1901, where he wrote and described an augmented reality experience. You put on these goggles and you see these letters on people's heads, and it indicates aspects of their personality that you would not be able or be aware of without the augmentating device. Augmentating, I don't even know if that's a word, but this device that is augmenting this experience. And just imagine that, like, these ideas have been circulating in our human consciousness. It's atavistic, and we're storytellers. And so one thing is to not rely just on these technologies now. I learned that, because I talked about Flash, obsolescence is, kind of what happens for anybody with a digital arts career. And so you have to be really flexible, and you have to have good ideas and be aware that your technology is going to change, it's going to update, it's going to migrate, or it's no longer going to exist, and you're going to have to find a new, AR platform or a new way to express yourself. So.
No, that's absolutely so important. If someone's entering into this, I don't know, you got to be in the flow. I love the errors that we're discussing in AR and how it locks, but also sort of the never being a master, always needing to be a novice.
Yeah,
I think there's something freshness to that, and also the sort of ideas are always what drive significant work, regardless of what medium it is, either a newer one or a traditional one, which segues perfectly into our next section, creative tool. What is your relationship with AR as a creative tool? How would you characterize the discoveries? What tickles you? What might be frustrating or fascinating about its grip on you? Will? Oh, well, you're muted.
Keep our terms, or you want to switch turns?
I don't know. You guys could Zoom arm wrestle. I don't know.
Okay. I'll jump in.
Okay.
For me, this has been a wonderful tool. Okay, and I have focused on it sort of somewhat exclusively, even though I still do other media, and you really end up doing lots of different media in order to do it. But it's been a really terrific tool for me, basically because despite the challenges, which can get rather huge in terms of the technology side of it, there's always something new that you end up discovering, and I'm going to show you an example of that, in a second here. And also, I want to emphasize that this is an interesting practice because it's what I would call an inside-outside practice. If we use IRL, and URL, it's a both practice, because basically you work on the computer, let's say, or maybe even your idea comes from a place, from a location. So first you're outside and you're exploring it and you're thinking about it and so on. Then you go into the computer and you start to make an idea and you start to form it into AR, and then you go out and see what it looks like in place, or you use your phone and you see what it looks like in place. If you're using a book, you want to see what it looks like on the book, so you're all of a sudden back in the physical world. So, and I have done this on very cold days, and you're in the real world when you go out with your phone to test something and it's below zero. I've even at different times had to develop gloves so that I can touch my phone and look at it. So it's a wonderful practice in that you're not always at the computer, and that it is this kind of inside outside thing. I will say the challenges, before I show you how I sort of capitalized on a glitch of it, and this is the idea of the medium, doing its own thing. The challenges of it are that the tech, as Carla was saying, the technologies are always changing, okay? And so often both Carla and I have to learn entirely new APIs and systems in a given year. And certainly if you're going to teach it, you have to be up on it. I am actually working with the company Hoverlay to think about a way of describing AR projects in a way that they could be archived and could withstand the changes in technology, because there are certain things that haven't changed ever since I started, and they would be almost more descriptive, but it would be a guideline for kind of configuring something for the future. So that is a change. But I'll show you I'll screen share here and show you an example of something I just discovered with the brand new technologies, which you beautifully outlined, Rebekkah, that have been brought to the phone. And do understand that when we started in AR, many of the capabilities of the phone to scan the room and around you and analyze it and then run the graphics to it, they were added by Apple and Android because they saw the potential for the medium. So when you are using your phone or iPad, you have a tailored object to AR. It has been made partly for AR. I know there's lots of other functions, but it's very kind of sophisticated stuff has been made for AR. So this is I'll go ahead and share screen here and just show you some examples of this. Hopefully you can see this okay, and here there's a little bit of sound to it. But what you're seeing is the phone live scanning different objects, and I'm doing something illegal here, which is filming in the net. This is another project where basically what it's doing is it's skinning. I'm using the phone's capability to skin the entire surroundings and fill it with virtual objects on the fly here. And so you can see partly reality and the kind of skinning of the objects as you go through it. And of course, I do this in kind of performative mode too, with the whole idea of creating an art object, or I like to talk about it as AR performance. And in this case, I'm calling it color field, right, to play off the idea that it is, in a sense, a real field, but it is, a reference to color field painting. And there's virtually sort of endless projects I can do with this, and it's all part of the technology of the phone. This is building a Trumpian gold bathroom during the COVID era, where I couldn't go very far. from home. And the rather amazing thing is once it's done, it stays there. So if you walk out of the room, you can walk back into the room and it will be covered with this material. So that is all in a sense, an aspect of the medium itself. And of course, I usually take that and bring it into a concept. This is a kind of painter series, and each of them, you know, plays with the symbolism of the color or the references of the color to the history of painting or to the future in the case of the one project I showed you that was in the subway, which is called Scorched Earth Painter, or Scorched Earth Painter, Scorched Earth Policy Painter is sometimes what I call it. So that gives it a kind of another referent. There you go for that question.
Great. I just had, I know I'm jumping around. Carla answered, then I have something to say. Do you want me to read it again?
No, I'll keep mine.
It's about tickling.
Oh, you have a question about tickling?
What tickles you or might find frustrating and fascinating about AR's grip on you?
Right. So speaking to the idea of it as a creative tool, I'll get to that first and then maybe talk a little bit about tickling, because I'm very ticklish now. I'm already kind of, and but early on, I'll admit that I was really seduced by the pure magic of it, which brings to mind that quote, that Arthur C. Clarke quote, and I have it here because I always paraphrase badly. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And like Will, what you were just showing, I mean, there's something magical about, you know, what you're able to produce in real time and the scanning and all of this that is now built into the actual phone. I've been doing a lot of volumetric scanning over the past year with my iPhone 12. And the one core tenet of speculative design, for example, there's this how to build a toaster project. And this man takes it upon himself to build a toaster and he fails miserably. And so at this point, I've been working with these technologies for quite some time, but there's still so much under the engine that I don't understand. And I'm okay with it because I am, you know, I'm running the software, I'm doing the front end, and I'm allowing the magic to occur. And I like that it's infused with that magic. And then one other comment, because I want to keep this response kind of short, brief. I had just some keywords, layers, textures, themes, variations as things that tickled me. And the idea, I studied classical piano for like 11 years, like when I was in grade school and high school, and I taught piano when I was in high school. And so I used to compose things, and I would compose for like little quartets and things. And so I'd start with a classical composition I'd written for piano, but then I'd transpose it for, you know, tuba or saxophone or these kind of things. And so it just feels so natural today in a hyper-mediated culture where we have so many different technologies at our fingertips. And particularly because I am someone who's not exclusively working in AR, I work in several kinds of technologies, even those old-fashioned ones like, you know, pen to paper. And so for me, one thing that I really appreciate about AR is, like, for instance, if I'm making a drawing, that's andante, you know, that's kind of slow, it's the beginning, it's static. And then the variation is the AR, where it's allegro and it's dynamic and it's swelling. And so it becomes operatic. And so those are the things I like to think about in this terms of themes and variations. And AR is one of these magical variations. I'll stop there.
Wow, that's terrific. Yeah, I just had a thought. It's not in the questions, but that Will had brought up, that you guys have a history working with these mediums in terms of like archiving and preservation. It's something when we talk about brand new medias that never really comes up, and you guys have a unique perspective on that. Any quick address on that? I just know for like tape-based video, it's a whole sort of mountain of concern.
Yeah, I'm a copious note taker, so I've been taking notes while you talk, Will, and that was one of my notes I circled, like hoverlay archiving, and I was so thrilled to hear that you're working on that project, because that is something, planned obsolescence by a lot of these companies that make and produce commercial applications, and it's programmed in now. And so we really, as artists, have to find ways. And there are people like Regina Harsani, who is doing tremendous work in this particular domain as well, as a professional who's thinking about how are we going to preserve these digital media, experiences going forward, because we've already discovered 20 years of net art, and there's so much work. I was just talking to my students today, and I was like, I was showing them, I was teaching a VR class, and I was presenting to them quite a few of the pioneers, people who were doing these things in the 60s and the 70s and 80s, Brenda Laurel, Char Davies, these kind of people. And I said, the reason I think it's so important that you know about these people is because you don't want to recreate the wheel. They had different technologies, but they had ideas that you can build upon. And sometimes we might think, because digital art history has a spotty record, or it's got a spotty trajectory of record keeping. So, I mean, I'm so thrilled you're working on an archive project, Will. And I think, we need to educate ourselves more, and I'm going to reach out to you more to learn what's going on with that.
Yeah, definitely. When I get somewhere, I want to consult everybody that has been using AR and see what they think about it. And interestingly enough, I tried to reach out to Regina, and she said, I don't want to touch this.
She's got so much.
She loves AR, but the tall order of archiving it is just, I think, seems to her just daunting. Now, here's what I would point out in terms of video. And, since I know video history quite well too, and that's my, what I learned before AR really, is that there are certain elements of video and the way it's made, or film and the way it's made, that I think you can describe and their relationship to each other. Like there's a camera and there's a lens, and then there's some kind of linear format that has a succession of images in it, and so on. So that for the future, if you can start to describe that kind of, in a sense, that kind of a structural relationship, then you can, when the mediums change, they tend to pick up on those things. And if you go into Premiere Pro, right, it has all the nonlinear editing stuff, and linear I learned on linear editing systems, and it often has 2 tracks, and it has fades and so on. So I think you can describe certain things, and I think that's even true for VR. You can begin to describe what this medium is and how it works with the viewer and so on. So that's somewhat my hope, and then the parts of that could be interchangeable. But this is a big problem for those of us that are working in AR and, let's say, trying to have a marketplace for selling our work, because there isn't a way of preserving it and so on, and it is always changing.
Yeah, the fragility of the platform and the obsolescence from the manufacturers, and then emulation sites. I think I saw it quickly in the chat, like this is a huge issue for any of these sort of like, the digital media are super fragile. I think that's just sort of important to come up. So those comments are great. Okay, oh, we're moving along. Let's see here. I'm gonna move on to the stories, creation of stories about or around AR and how it will impact us. I think we touched on this a bit, but like the stories around it. Your thoughts on those narratives, be they mythologizing or advocacy for imagined positive potential of these technologies, such as AR delivering these enhanced extended modes, yes, of rich experience, expanding our experience of location and bodies, or as a way to advance health and goals in society and environment, or the converse, leading society to greater market coercion, loss of self-confidence based on unrealistic expectations. I'm thinking more like, I don't know, the filters and so on. Any thoughts on those narratives?
And I'm sure that we're going to have lots to say on this, both Carla and I. But I think it's very interesting to introduce the concept of narrative. Let's say I'll start with that. There's lots of things you're talking about here that are really important. And I was going to give examples, except I can see time is going to get, we're going to run out of time with our excitement here. But what I would say is there's a couple of sides of narrative that I think are really important in creating AR. And really, this is true of any work. But one is the narrative for AR that surrounds it. Okay. And that
That's
could
awesome.
be, and that's what Carla is talking about, I think, about the extended narrative, that she comes up with a sort of, or forms a general idea in which AR functions within that, or has a take on that, or adds to it in some form or another. And that's always the way I've worked with AR, also in the sense that much of my work has been site-based. So I will, let's say, focus on a site and try and find out a little bit about its history, its cultural background, and so on. It's not unlike site-specific art, and then create a virtual art project that fits within, that addresses the history or addresses what could be there. It could be the future of it. It could be something that plays on the past. And it's very interesting if you want to go look at the work of the critic Mi-Wan Kwan, who wrote in the mid 1990s on site specificity, and she called her essay is One Site After Another, which is just amazing in terms of AR. And she talks about how she goes through the history of site-based works and talks about how the site is now, in a sense, fluid, and that it really depends on the cultural interpretations of that site, the history of the site. It's not just a physical site. And if you look back at site-specific sculpture, it starts out sort of almost independent of site, and you take a sculpture anywhere, versus earthworks, and then how it goes into even more cultural critiques of site and so on. And so she even mentions the internet in 1995 as a model for site. And that is, in fact, how internet was often talked about theoretically, as a multivalent site with different layers to it and different connections to it. So I often approach something as a site-based work. I will say that in terms of creating an awareness and creating, sometimes that awareness can be a critique and sometimes it can be a suggestion. I'll give you one example of just describing it, by describing it, and that is a series of works that I did with other AR artists at the Salem Historical Site in just north of Boston. And that was the site historically of the maritime trade. And a group of us artists did works that played off the history of what happened there. One of the ones I did was called Privateers Reenactment, and it goes back to actually the Revolutionary War, where ships were allowed to be commissioned to steal the contents of British ships, warships that were coming in. I took virtual masts and made a whole kind of floating ball of masks that floated out in the harbor, and also address the disappearance of cod, the fish cod, which is what made everybody rich in Salem and everybody depended on, referencing the idea that cod are disappearing and moving north. And so I had a kind of funeral pyre of cod going up to the sky, leaving from the State House. And that was a way of both addressing the future and suggesting to to people, hopefully, it was an eco-based work, even though it's not, hitting you over the head. It's, and I called it the ascension of cod. So you sadly see the cod going up to heaven, and it's meant to play off that. I don't know if that answers your question, because there's so many aspects to what you're kind of mentioning to here, but hopefully it does a little bit to it.
No, that was great. Carla?
Will and I actually had a conversation like a week ago, and we were talking about and kind of teasing out, the differences and the corollaries between our works, and one thing that really came up was the way that Will, you do this comprehensive research, and it is so kind of site specific. It's almost like installation or site specific work, and it is based more on location. And for me, I, at this point in my life, have about 10 or 11 avatars through which I express myself. And all of them, there is some version of them, some 3D model. Most of my avatars, I have a GLB, I have an FBX, I have an OBJ, and then I have something for video, they exist in all of these different file formats, but almost every one of them has performed in AR. And so I think of most of my AR work and my kind of exploration of narrative through AR as performative, as performing these multiplicity of identities. I call it prismatic identity. And really, I'm trying to avoid using extension because I just don't want to overuse this word, but elasticity. So for me, I began, in the mid 90s, I was performing in front of a video camera. And then with the selfie drawing project, for example, a few years back, I'm performing again, but I'm slowing down the process of photography and making these drawings. And then I start utilizing these photographic sources, but all of it is performative. All of it is image-based and layers. When I was a painter, my paintings used to be this thick, because I could never make up my mind. I'd paint them again, I'd scrape them down, then I'd build them all up again. And there was some anecdote, like a Rembrandt, you could hold it by its nose. You could hold one of my abstract paintings by its nose. When I discovered layers, when I started first working in Photoshop and Premiere, that was a really profound moment for me, that I could turn layers on and off. And now I can work with layers, and dematerialize and rematerialize things and add something and subtract something. And so for me, it's about these layers and these performances, and that I could build entropy in, but there's no entropy really set into this because it exists. And just like performance art from the 60s and 70s, so much of my AR work really exists now in documentation.
Yeah, that's always been something that I've recognized, that working in any digital software is a performance activity.
Yeah.
So one performs the system, and that's sort of the nature of these technologies. For me personally, the foundational is that they're performative.
And also just to point out a sort of longer term discussion, and the fascinating thing about going through school and dealing with postmodernism in the mid 1990s is many of the ideas that have come to pass on the internet and come to pass in terms of how we look at, for example, identity and gender, they were all theorized in the 1990s quite well. So you know what I mean? And in fact, the sort of the crux of the apex of the discussions we had was Donna Haraway's, Cyborg. So that became a, but that was seen as the end of a sort of, at that time, of a very long history. So that the idea, for example, that us as humans, that we aren't already augmented, and I like to say we're always already augmented, is kind of a myth. Everything is augmented. Culture augments everything around us. It augments our bodies, and sometimes those augmentations are not good, right? In other words, you talk about the body. were talking long time ago about the body as a site, right? And all the problematics of that, as well as the positive things about that. And then fluidity and the introduction of Donna Haraway saying, well, I don't know if there's anything essential about the body itself. And so that the body is fluid. And I think that's a better idea to think that you can change your body up. And there were all kinds of philosophical ideas about surface and depth and so on. There is no depth, it's all surface, or what is that kind of contrast? So these ideas have been with us for a very long time. Augmentation is as old as culture itself. It's just that we're materializing it or virtualizing it, if you will.
Well put.
Yeah, it came up in a really early one with AI that how humans sort of, I don't know, work with tools and are sort of how we sort of, I don't know, become through tools, be it language or these technologies, is really fascinating. Oh boy, hey, do you guys want to do some questions? I'm jumping through our questions, but we're about quarter till, and I see 14 things in the chat that I haven't looked at yet.
There was one question I really wanted to get to, was the pranks. And is there any way we could address that question quickly? And I will answer quickly. I'll show images and let them speak. Because I just love the question of pranks and
okay, I'll read it real quick.
Yeah.
Does your work play pranks, undercut, seek to expose or engage or promote these narratives around augmented reality? Or should it? Is the medium the message? Will it create a social creative environment by its mere presence? Is then literacy a good approach to these stories about our augmented selves?
So I am going to share my screen really quickly, Will. And the idea of playing pranks, undercutting, is the medium, is the message. It's already apparent throughout this talk that I don't just focus on one medium or one platform. And really, Will, you don't either, but like AR, I mean, you have, like, in terms of someone being an expert, if there was anyone that I was going to call an expert, I feel like you are, just in terms of your commitment and the amount of time and the number of projects and the way that you conceive projects. And I generally will turn to AR for very specific projects. And so one that was really meaningful to me, and again, this idea of performance that I wanted to talk about, and really I glommed more onto the idea of pranks. So I'm just going to talk about pranks, is I have one avatar, Lucille Trackball, and she is an AI stand-up comedian within when I talk about AI, she's an AI stand-up comedian within a kind of speculative narrative sense. And she performs in AR. And she is a place, she's like a lot of my work where I'm looking to past and future, something that Will already talked about, you know, the idea that AR or that we have been working with technologies and growing through these technologies since the beginning of time, or the beginning of human time. I like to look back. So Lucille Trackball is an amalgam of Archambaldo and Lucille Ball, who broke gender and age barriers and all of these things. And I am not going to get anyone to, you know, ask me to do stand-up comedy at a comedy club or go on Saturday Night Live. But AR is a place that is incredibly accessible and a place where I can actually garner an audience for, you know, Lucille Trackball's weird puns and humor. And so here's a joke for you. I wasn't really a good student. I was like a C++ student. And her operating system is Cougar. She's railing against sexism and ageism and, you know, all of these things that we deal with as humans, the obsolescence, but like tech obsolescence too as an operating system. And then quickly, the other two are pieces that have been trained with AI actually. And so I've been generating these images and then texture mapping them and then creating these augmented experiences and really thinking about how I'm mapping that to a place or a space. They were for specific kind of calls, things that I was invited to. I'm going to stop though, because I know we have questions and I want Will to share some slides. Oh, the last thing I'm going to share really quickly, just because I talked about it. These are just some shots from the selfie drawing project that I've mentioned and alluded to before. I'm done. I'm stopping sharing. Time flies when you're having fun. Will, take it away.
Will, you're on mute.
I'll do a quick one here. Promise to keep it very short because I see some great questions and I don't mind going over if people want to discuss things a little longer. Doing pranks with AR is I love doing this, and it's part of the idea of intervention. And I can't show you all the projects I've done that are pranky, but one I'll show you here was called skywriting, and I'll share screen and just talk about this project a tiny bit here. Not long after learning AR, this idea occurred to me to be able to do skywriting, where you would create a skywriting and also eventually make it so that the public could do skywriting, and then you would look up and see the AR version of it. And I started this during Occupy Wall Street, and I noticed some of the comments are, interestingly, about technologies and money and power and so on. And this was the idea of democratizing space in a way, and allowing people to make comments over, governmental buildings. And I did this in Washington through a show that we did at the Corcoran, and then went out into the area of Washington and got people to write messages over the sky and so on. Now, the results are sort of, mixed at different times, but the idea here is to create something to say, okay, here's a really cheap way of doing skywriting. Okay, so now it's not this really expensive thing, it's something that everybody can do. In some senses, this is a prank because it's virtual, right? It's not, in a sense, it's a joke. It's not real skywriting, but people take it very seriously, and it allows them to kind of play around with the concept and see it on site. I even used it during the Women's March just after Trump was elected, and I simply put up "nasty woman" all over Washington in the sites that I had used before. And then I've even used it kind of for poetry and so on. So this is a prank in the sense that it appears to be, I'm presenting it as something that everybody can do, if you will, but it is, in some senses, it's a joke on a certain level. And I think that's wonderful about art, and something that Carla gets at, making her figures that make jokes here. Okay, and
Ooh.
stop.
I wrote Blue in the chat. Are there any questions you see that seem to be pretty good, Blue? Are you there? I see the last question, or if
I'm
Will,
here.
I think you also said that you had seen some great questions.
Rebekkah, if you see Joshua's question, it's terrific.
Is that the JB question?
Yes.
About
Joshua
Afghanistan and Pokemon?
I don't know. Is that the I don't know how to frame this question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll read it because that's what I do on these shows.
Yeah,
I don't know how to frame this into a clear question, but I remember reading a poignant article about the Pokemon Go characters left behind in Afghanistan as US soldiers withdrew and people were fleeing the country last year. I still haven't figured out where to put my feelings about reading this article. Continues. Do you imagine or fear of an instance of this digitally littered AR landscape as companies continue to come and go and upgrade their softwares? All of these things have an infrastructure behind them, support them, or even forgetting about them, like forgotten blogs or emails online. We already live in a reality in which the earth has become dangerously polluted. And I wonder what happens if this is left unchecked as we continue to push forward into these archivable, augmented realities. Perhaps my fears are unfounded, and as soon as those fleets of computer servers are destroyed, it would go away on its own or be repurposed. It's not much of a question, but I still wonder if you have thoughts on this. I guess I maybe wonder about how limitless the AR space really is. Great question.
Carla, you're on
I
mute.
just realized it. So I just want to make sure I say that's an amazing, amazing reflection. And one thing I'm thinking about in terms of how limitless the AR space really is, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not. It came up in conversation several years ago because I was using an AR technology and someone decided to subvert me. And so they used one of my images as a trigger for another AR experience, and how we legislate that. I mean, it gets kind of gnarly. And then someone was mentioning that there used to be, I don't know much about air travel and airspace and how we kind of lay claim to it. I mean, earlier you were talking about this, Will, like, you know, kind of like boundaries and, you know, territories and these kind of things. But you used to, from what this person was sharing with me, people owned their property all the way up to the sky, right? And so thinking about that now in terms of particularly corporate monopolies, like what's happening with the metaverse right now and ownership. So there's all this talk about decentralization, but then there's also all this monopolizing going on. And so who ultimately owns these different AR zones? And will they get congested? Which made me think, one reference, just a wonderful video to watch if you haven't seen it, that kind of visualizes a congested AR space, is Hyper Reality by Kiichi Matsuda. Kiichi Matsuda. And sorry, I didn't pronounce that correctly. It is from like 2016, right? Well, do you remember that video? And it just, like, as I was reading this, it made me think of Hyper Reality. So I suggest watching that.
Yeah, that's a great video to sort of visualize that. The way I'd answer the question is a little bit the following. I take it in kind of two parts: artists making work and commerce. Okay,
Right.
they're not always separated. But when we as artists make these projects, we often incorporate into the project in a sense, a critique. Okay, so that it, you know, especially if we show the glitches of how it's made, and even painters show how a painting is painted by using drips, you know, like drips show that this is actually created by paint and so on. Those of us that have embraced these technologies, we are well aware, I think, Carla, right? And I include you, Rebekkah, that they are presented as utopic, but we know they are dystopic. Okay, we know that there are flip sides to these questions, and especially in technology. So it's really good if in these, it's like all of Carla's different avatars. There's so many different avatars that there's a critique in there, you know, that it's, you know, which is her, or which does she bond with? Are they really real? Which one? And sometimes she confuses as to which is her in the first place, which is going to be a question we're all going to have to probably deal with at some point or another. But so many of the projects we do as artists have a kind of critique, hopefully, in them, and a thing that kind of questions them. If you're going to ask the question of artists, you know, do they waste materials, or does using this technology, is it a technological problem? Yes, it is. But you would have to ask the same question of a painter. Is it a great idea to use all of these different colors and grind all these colors and paint things and use canvas and so on? That uses materials which also contribute to climate change and so on. I think we're just beginning to understand the effects of climate change that are created by technological media. But it's a very, very good point in terms of, you know, what this costs to do. Finally, I mean, the only other thing I would say is that when I started out in this medium, and this is kind of a joke too, because we would often be invited to, let's say, speak, and sometimes in a museum context, and often the audience would go, well, this new medium is on a cell phone, and very few people in the world have cell phones, or not everybody has this high technology. So aren't you making something for a very exclusive and rich audience? Well, the interesting thing is there's actually more access to the cell phone at this point than there is to getting into a museum, to seeing an artwork in a museum. And that's a very rarefied situation, which very few people do. So in fact, the hidden critique there was, your work is too public. It's too out there. Do you know what I mean? It's too accessible. It's an interesting flip side to it. So you can look at this also as a very accessible artwork, like that many people can see, rather than having to get a ticket to a museum and go in and see an artwork, or go to a gallery at an opening and so on.
Well, what about the corporate aspect of this? Just want to make sure you touch on that.
Yeah, the corporate, and I'm curious to what Carla feels, because also teaching at NYU, I'm sure you get a lot of people that want to go right into the sort of commercial side of this and so on. There's no question that AR is going to be used more and more on the corporate side of it. And there's all kinds of problematics about that, that I would openly admit are going to intrude with your life in various ways, the same way that ads on the internet do, okay? You know, we have to learn how to deal with that as it comes along, and we're only at the beginning of it. But, you know, we have to understand that this media is used both commercially, just like video is used commercially, and then it is also used by artists. And those are a little bit sometimes two different areas. Carla, how would you talk about this side of things?
Well, I had some notes prepared, and I included a statement where someone was asking me about the metaverse, and I kind of changed things up a little bit to talk more specifically about AR. But I'm just going to read it. In terms of AR, and also including the whole extended reality conversation going on right now, you know, virtual reality, mixed reality, Web3, the metaverse, all of these things are converging more and more, and we'll have new names for them. I basically describe myself at NYU as all the R's person, right? MR, VR, XR, AR. Right? But I did want to make this point. One, I made this, you know, point about digital materiality. A lot of times we're not thinking about those servers. We're not thinking about our digital footprint. And also, I agree with you, Will. More people have access to their phones now than they, you know, might have to a museum, particularly during the past 2.5 years of a worldwide pandemic. But we're at a point right now where 60% of the world is currently, you know, has internet access. And so that's 4.83 billion people. That's a lot of people, but that's still not everyone. So I think about this kind of like in the context of education. And so like in developed countries, if we're all going online and we're forging ahead to all these immersive Web3 standards and everything's AR and all of the things that as an artist, so I'm talking more about kind of corporate side and what happens when this becomes ubiquitous. One thing, because we already see the inequity and inequality that has just been, you know, exploding around the world, and I know we're probably at time, but if all education in developed countries goes online, developing countries and poorer communities would be at a greater disadvantage than they may well be today in terms of preparing their students for an increasingly technologized future. As we have these conversations about AR, Web3, the metaverse, in regards to education, business, and also the arts, I think it's important to consider a much larger swath of the population than just those in very advantageous positions for these imminent rollouts. And I don't want to participate utopias, dystopias. I want a protopia. A protopia is something that I feel like is a more realistic model for kind of world building and working towards the changes we want to see in our future, not just predicting them, but building and participating, even as artists, as educators, in creating different futures, new trajectories. Because I don't want the metaverse, for example, to live up to its dystopian roots. Neil Stevenson, the metaverse was a dystopia. I went to hear him give a talk in December, and he was saying, do they have no irony? The metaverse was a dystopia. I don't want to participate. I mean, I work on machines, there's digital materiality, there's servers, but I want to try not to participate any more than I have to by maintaining my practice to further inequity and inequality in the world with these technologies. Final statement.
And that's wonderful, protopia. That's a takeaway term that I'm going to take away from this. Yeah, and then a flip side to this is very interesting. I think we get as teachers, Carla, which is that we're actually teaching some of the technology that people can really make a living out of. So sometimes I go, is it really my role to be dissuading these people from learning these technologies? And look at this whole grant, which is to the NASCA grant, is to spread this. These are opportunities for people to make a living, and making a living. And this, certainly my school has a lot of first generation participants and students. So they're getting their first chances to kind of make a living. So, despite the problems of technology, it's also an opportunity.
Oh, yes, definitely. I do not want to reduce this to kind of any kind of binary thinking. And it's obvious I'm someone who embraces emerging technologies. I teach them, I promote them. I just think that there's always a fine line. And I think that we as artists, as participants, oh my gosh, there's a quote I'm trying to think right now. We're all Spaceship Earth. We're all participants in the Spaceship Earth. We're not just, riding it for, a joy cruise. We're all participating. We're all helping to operate the ship, Spaceship Earth. It's McLuhan.
Isn't it Bucky?
Huh?
Isn't it Bucky?
I think it's McLuhan, not Bucky. It sounds like a Bucky quote. You're right. But I'm pretty sure Spaceship Earth is McLuhan. But nonetheless, what I'm saying is, we are here, we're not going back, and we're participating, but how do we help provide navigation through it so we don't crash land in a dystopia?
Yeah, boy, all the questions
Nice.
are so great. But I think we should probably wrap this up though.
Yeah.
Although I think this is difficult to wrap this up. Yeah, I just as we wrap it up, thank you both, and I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. If anyone wants to, can we email at some point or something? If there's some questions we really didn't get to, unfortunately. But I think from my perspective, just literacy and being aware of the whole sort of range of prospects, and that, as you said, it's got a lot of contradictions.
Yeah.
That these technologies, our engagement with them, has a lot of contradictions, and I think this is where wonderful artists can kind of bring us into that space. And it's a rich space. Contradictions are always very rich space. It's these sort of imbalances that kind of keep you, I don't know, on a tightrope of beautiful new things. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Oh, there's a lot of stuff here in the chat. And then thank you, Blue, Alyssa, Jess, San, the whole Roco crew, and Niska, and Wave Farm. And I wish everyone a good night, and thanks so much for coming along in this wonderful conversational
journey.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank
Watch
you.
our social media and we'll share the video from tonight.
All right,
night.
take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Cheerio.
Bye. Bye.